Why am I here? Even in a world governed by law and logic, the mystery still gets the final word. And then he appears, a man who's spent more than 5 decades mapping the space between the ologies, between matter and meaning, who transmuted a learning challenge into literary abundance, voids into value, a vision into space and time. Dr. John Demartini doesn't just teach human behavior. He distills the logos through it, revealing the soul's architecture in a language both precise and profound. In this episode, we travel from the quantum field to the tree of life, from personal limitation to the cold clarity of universal law. We speak of systems, of science, of soul. We trace the roots of his purpose, and by witnessing the steps he's taken, we remember that all great wisdom often begins where the wound once was. So, if you've ever asked yourself why you're here, stay close. This isn't just a conversation, it's an initiation.
I think that our voids in life determine our values. Anything that we judged in the past has an impact, leaves us void, leaves us feeling empty. And there's a part of us innately that wants to feel fulfilled, filling those voids. So things we judged in the past can become the very things that we end up fulfilling, doing. So in my case, I was born with a speech impediment. And I had to go to a speech pathologist when I was about 1.5 to about 4. I remember having to put strings and buttons in my mouth and do all these exercises to try to help my mouth pronounce sounds because I was not making proper sounds. Then I found out in first grade that I had a reading problem. No matter what was happening, I wasn't putting spelling and phonemes together and making sounds, and I had dyslexia. And I was not making any meaning out of the words. So I went from normal reading to remedial reading to wearing a dunce cap. And so I was also born with a arm and leg deformity where my arm was turned in and my leg was turned in. So I had to wear braces from about 1.5 to about 4 on my left side, which was both a blessing to the people at the time because it forced me to use my right hand, and left-handed people, which I am, forced me to be more ambidextrous. Mm-hmm. So the restriction of the braces made me want to be free, to be able to go and not be constrained, so to travel. I've traveled around 21 million miles on flights and a couple million miles on sailing. So I've done a lot of travel. The speech impediment led me to become a speaker. The reading and writing, because when your hand is turned in, you write backwards. Reading and writing challenge made me a reader and writer. Mm-hmm. So I was in first grade, and my first grade teacher asked my parents to come to the class because she kind of gave up on me, and she said, I'm afraid your son's never going to be able to read or write or communicate effectively, probably won't go very far or amount to much. Well, I wanted to become financially independent. I'm now 50 times financially independent. and not go very far. I've traveled more than most people. So the very thing I was told that I wouldn't do later became the very thing I ended up doing. I wish I could thank the first grade teacher because all of those challenges were on the way, not in the way, even though I may not have seen them initially. And I think that happens in a lot of people's lives. We don't realize that these voids become our gifts. A lot of great health professionals start out with health problems or somebody in the family with health problems. And sometimes I was just on an air yesterday with a gentleman who's completely blind and deaf and has a podcast.
Wow.
He has a cochlear implant, and it's amazing how fast he can take sounds through the cochlear implant and have a conversation. You wouldn't know it.
That's profound.
Even though there's one's a glass eye and the other's an eye pointing in a different direction and he can't hear. Except through this special device that goes into his brain, and he's converted it in special, So this impediment became his sight and sound to the world. So our voids determine our values. Now, what is a void? I asked that question a long time. Let's say you meet an attractive girl walking down the street, and you are infatuated with her, and you're attracted to her. You have a amygdala impulse to seek her out. She matches your search image. And for a moment, you're blind to the downsides, and you're conscious and aware of the upsides. So you're attracted to her. Now, if you stay with her a day, a week, a month, or a year, or something like that, you may discover all the downsides. But initially, you're blind to them, and you're attracted, and you're infatuated, and you have a little puppy love. So there's an unconscious side that you're not aware of, that over time you'll eventually discover. Your intuition's trying to whisper to you about it, but your impulse from your amygdala is too strong to allow your intuition to whisper. Your intuition is saying, don't rush into this, let's check this out, let's not be gullible, don't sacrifice your life for them, make sure this is real, these kind of things. So that unconscious side drives our life until we're fully conscious. Same thing if we're resentful to somebody, we're conscious of the downsides, but we're unconscious of the upsides. So anytime we judge something, any event, any person, or even anything about ourselves, we create a conscious and unconscious split, and the unconscious portion is a void. It's what's missing in our awareness. It's an emptiness. It's a disowned part that we're not consciously aware. It's a dismemberment, as Plato called it. Mm-hmm. Those voids with intuition are whispering to try to come to the surface and be fulfilled. Mm-hmm. And fulfillment is being fully aware, fully awake, fully conscious, instead of being unconscious of those parts. So anytime we judge, we create voids, and our hierarchy of values are determined by those voids. And whatever's highest on our value, in the hierarchy of the values, is where we're most intrinsically driven, where we most spontaneously act, where we're most objective and neutral in our perspective, and we neutralize the judgments that gave rise to the voids, and therefore, when we do those, we have the most fulfillment. And this highest value, Aristotle called the telos, the end in mind, the final cause in his four causes. And if we identify what that is, and we structure our life and prioritize our life according to it, it is an expression of our ontological identity. We'll identify ourselves by what's highest in our value. In my case, my highest value is teaching. I identify myself as a teacher. My teleological purpose is an expression of that. I feel it's my purpose to travel the world and teach, particularly in human behavior and self-mastery. And my epistemological area of expertise, where I'm going to excel the most, is in the area of my highest value. So when the Delphic Oracle said, know thyself, be thyself, you'll love yourself, it's describing the highest value, which is the culmination of all the voids in your life summarized into that which helps you fulfill the greatest amount of voids, the greatest amount of value. Mm-hmm. So everybody has a hierarchy of values. And whatever is highest on it is the purpose, the path of the purpose. Now, can that change? Sure. My first 12 years of my life was baseball. From age 3 to 12, I was a baseball player. I identified with baseball. I slept with my baseball. I played baseball every day. I actually was a great pitcher and got, all-stars and all that stuff. But then my parents moved from Houston, Texas to Richmond, Texas, and baseball was not the same there. If I struck somebody out, a gang would attack me the next day. And half the team didn't show up. It was a small rural town where we lived, very low economics. So I ended up deciding, well, I'm going to do sports because I can't read and write and speak. I'm going to do sports. So surfing is something I didn't have to rely on a team. So I started surfing at 9, but I formally focused and said, I'm going to now surf big waves around the world at 13. So from 13 to 18, my life was intensely focused on traveling the world and surfing. I mean, I left home at 13 and I took off to California and then to Texas, to Mexico, and then over to Hawaii. And I lived literally in a park bench. I didn't care where I lived. I just wanted to surf. And then I nearly died at 17. And then I met Paul C. Bragg at a little yogi class. And that's when I realized in one night listening to him that maybe, after hearing him speak, maybe I could overcome my learning problems. Maybe I could read, write, and speak someday. And maybe I can be intelligent, because I was told I would never have that. And then that shifted, and now I'm 71 almost, and now for the last 52 years, from 17 on till now, 18 to now, I've just been wanting to research, write, and travel and teach. So I'm pretty well useless outside that. I'm not much of any value anywhere except those 4 things. I can do those 4 things.
I mean, I wouldn't say that at all. I think it's really interesting how you had this profound shift as well. You often say this in your story. One thing that definitely resonates is everything I've become very skilled at was once a vulnerability or something that I perceived as a weakness. And until I explored that and went through the trials and tribulations of overcoming it, that's actually what gave me the power to go to others and give them that same gift, right? It gave me the knowledge of like going from the shadow all the way to something light that I can actually give to others to illuminate to some degree. And I think that's kind of the scientific method of growth in many ways.
Yeah.
But as it relates to your story, I imagine that those insights that, pain is purpose doesn't really come along until you've integrated and grown. So I would imagine potentially after Paul Bragg came into the picture, that's when you started to explore, to learn. That impulse, though, was there something deeper, something profound that you experienced, perhaps beyond information that he offered you, that created that shift?
Well, Paul Bragg spoke for about an hour the first time I met him. And what he said, nobody ever said before. I mean, he inspired a lot of people. He inspired Jack LaLanne, who is a massive health culturalist that I grew up with. He impacted Steve Jobs. He impacted Donald Trump. He impacted Gloria Swanson. And there's about 50 famous people that their lives and careers were impacted by this guy. I was one of them. And he had a way when he spoke that it made sense. And he said that we have a body, we have a mind, and we have a soul. And the body must be directed by the mind, and the mind must be guided by the soul. Now, the soul is a Platonic, Aristotelian construct, a religious construct, that we have this immortal essence that is something greater than our phenomenological existence. But he said that inspiration inside, if it guides your life, you reach greater potential, which is the intrinsic value. The highest value is the intrinsic value that allows you to access it. He also said that what you think about, what you visualize, what you affirm, what you feel, what you write out, and what you act upon can change your life and become your destiny. And if you decide and get clear about it, and it's really congruent and aligned with what you value most, your life trajectory can change. And it says you want to set goals for yourself, your family, your community, your city, your state, your nation, your world, and beyond for 100 to 120 years. Because he said by the time you're at that age, people will be living 100 years at least. So I took him up on it. Then he said he does classes each morning at Fort DeRussy, and the next morning at 5:45, I was hitchhiking the other side of the island from the North Shore, and I went over there and I started studying with him every single day until he left the island. And I learned whatever I could about health and life and how to manage life. And it gave me an impetus to believe that I could read, I could write, I could speak, I could do things, I could someday become intelligent. I really didn't think I was going to be intellectually, functioning. I thought I could surf. I thought I could do sports. Not that that's not an intellectual thing. It's just, it wasn't academia. Mm-hmm. But I didn't think I was going to be able to read. I had a guy named Jackie Royd who used to read for me. I used to talk him into, can you read that for me? And he goes, well, you can read it. I said, no, I like the way you read it. And he's still a friend of mine all these years, 54 years, 55 years. And he always wondered why I asked him to read, but it's because I didn't make any sense. I could look at a girly magazine and I could look at a surf magazine and I could surf to get in one of those surf magazines, but reading it wasn't my thing. So I started on a journey to learn how to read when I was 18. And it was using a dictionary and memorizing 30 words a day. And my mom, when I finally moved home from Hawaii at 18, my mom tested me on 30 words a day, and I grew my vocabulary 20,000 words over a 2-year period. And I went back to school, and at first I failed, and within a short period of time, because of the determination of memorizing words and practicing words and reading everything I could get my hands on, dictionaries, encyclopedias, I eventually excelled. And now I've been a voluminous reader. I'm just at the 31,000 book level. So they told me I would never read. Well, I probably read more than most people. And they said I'd never write. Well, I've written a few hundred books now, about 45 are self-help paperbacks, but a lot of textbooks. And they said I'd never amount to anything. Well, I'm 50 times financial independent. They said I'd never go very far in life. I've traveled way more than most people. And all the things that they said I wouldn't do is the very things that I was blessed to do. And so I would never communicate effectively. I've done about 300 to 400 speeches for 52 years every year. And I still do them. So I'm hoping to do that until I can't do it anymore.
That totally resonates. I would say one of the things that attracted me to your work the most is when studying human behavior or anything that's relatively metaphysical, like the soul, as you brought up, or anything Aristotle, Plato, Pythagoras, any of the likes, it can be very hard to ground that type of information. But since you're so systematic with everything and you have this way of measuring the value of things, you're able to synthesize really complex information and then convert that into like practical steps to attainment. And that definitely comes through in your work. Everything's very approachable for a common person. But something I hear in a lot of the guidance that you give is an understanding of the metaphysical, right? The nature of existence, the nature of the soul on a universal level, and then also universal law, right? The law of balance, the law of the one I've heard you speak to. So I'd be curious how you inform all those, different lessons and practices that you put together. And then if that's something that you've learned or it's something that you know deep within, how you've uncovered those. I'm just curious to hear your scaffolding for how the world works.
The night I met Paul Bragg, he mentioned a term called universal laws, which some people used to call natural laws. natural laws were mainly of the world, but universal laws were beyond that. But at one time, the world was the universe. In cosmology, in a geocentric world, the universe revolved around the world. We were the center of the universe. So universal laws and laws of nature, natural laws, were then turned into human laws. Humans made up laws that were variable and they were violable, but universal laws were not. They were stable. And when I heard him mention that, I said, I want to know about these things called universal laws. So when I was 18 and I started to learn how to read and grow my vocabulary, I was living in dictionaries and encyclopedias to try to catch up with the other kids. And I looked up, what is a universal law? Well, universal law, it gave examples of the law of gravity and the law of radiation by Maxwell and, these kind of things. And so I started compiling universal laws. And it led me to Max Planck's quantum formulas, which are really, really amazing principles that you build a foundation of knowledge on. But all of those laws, I thought, well, how do you know a universal law? A universal law must work in the micro and the macro and anywhere in between. So this led me to the study of all the disciplines, all the ologies, which led me to a very ancient construct and Greek construct and Jewish construct called the Logos. And I thought, okay, in fact, right now I'm writing a textbook, I'm about halfway through, on the Logos, which is where I started at 18. I'm rewriting a textbook on it right now. And it's a very fascinating exploration on what exactly is this Logos. Now, the Logos was the rational order that was in the universe that the natural laws are governed by. And that humans, if they lived in accordance with it, as the Stoics said, they had mastery of life. And when they didn't, they had the affections and passions disturb and distract and dramatize. The theater of, pleasure and pain, if you didn't. But if you had rationality, you had reason. So I made a list of every known discipline and ology at the time. And over the years, I've added some new ones because there's been new ones. And then I made a commitment to read at least 100 books in each of these disciplines. I remember reading a book when I was 18 on European philosophers, and Descartes was there. He was a French mathematician, and he said he wanted to be a man of letters. And I found that all the people, all the men and women, mostly men, but men and women, who had left the mark in the world, Herbert Spencer, for instance, Charles Darwin, were polymaths. They were individuals that had explored more than one discipline and weren't overly specialized, but had studied broadly 10 times the amount the average person was normally studying. And so I made a commitment to study all the disciplines, to be a polymath, and to at least 100 books in each discipline. Now, some disciplines I've read 1,400 books in. Some I've read maybe 60 in. But it's an average probably of 100 easily, because it's 31,000 books. And there's 300 disciplines that I've gotten to do. So I just made a commitment to do that. And the reason why is that I felt if I studied all the disciplines, I could find a common thread in the laws that governed them. And that would give me a stronger foundation of a body of work that I could then rely on to teach. Because I didn't want to teach. Paul Dirac, in his Principles of Quantum Mechanics in 1947, which I read when I was 18 with the help of a lot of dictionaries, was the first introduction to quantum theory. And he said that it's not that we don't know so much, it's we know so much that it's so. And there's a dialectic of opinions that are polarized, and if you can't synthesize, as Zeno and Heraclitus have described, and find the balance that Pythagoras was trying to find, and you would be swayed by polarized perspectives. So I tried to put together a system, which I call the Demartini method now, that transcends the limits of the dialectic and the subjective biased interpretations of these disciplines to try to put together a body of knowledge that I could rely on. Now, is it Foolproof? No. It's my own limits and biases and my versions, but it has a check and balance system that helps. And I've tried to use that, studying all these disciplines, to find that body of knowledge that I can rely on in human behavior. Because I believe that if something in the quantum world that's somewhat probabilistic, and there's something in the massive, universal domain, classical world, where's the common thread to them? And does a human being have a little of both? A proton is made out of quarks and gluons and mesons that are emerging and submerging out of a quantum fluctuation constantly. And it looks like there's a structure called a proton, but it's actually a surging inner web of waves and particles fluctuating. Well, our body is made out of that. So it's basically a vibratory system that's real to our senses, the phenomenological senses, but in actuality is maybe a mathematical entity that's abstract, that our mind can't grasp in full. So I figure if I'm going to study the human body and the human brain and the human psychology and philosophy and stuff, I want to find the most universal laws so I can build a foundation on. And that's what I've been doing. And so I've systematized all the disciplines. I found out there were 4 disciplines that were sort of pseudosciences. They were kind of soft humanitarian sciences: physiology, psychology, sociology, and theology. And I thought, why do they have to be that way? Why can't they be turned into hard sciences? And so I've been on a mission since I was 18 to take those 4 areas and try to make a duplicatable, reproducible hard science out of it. And I think I've made some major progress on that. And it's very inspiring to look at the physics and mathematics of how perceptions work and how decisions occur and how brain functions and how the feedback systems and excitation inhibition ratios and anti-memory and memory systems work, and how we store things that are valent from the hippocampus, they're episodic memories that we create that are subjective experiences. How do these things actually work? We're approaching it. And is there a quantum component to it? And is there a classical component to it? So I've tried to find those universal principles and apply those and make some sort of practical application that is reproducible, that's duplicatable, that you can rely on. And it's happened. We can now take physiology and we can take some of the symptomatology that is illness, and we can now trace it back to the epigenetics and the transmitters, and we can do it and link it back to the perceptions and see how our ratios of perceptions are impacting our neurochemistry, which is impacting our physiology and our autonomics and our epigenetics and the gene expressions and the proteins and the functions of the cell. And I've been mapping those things out for 46 years. And there is a science to it. But what's interesting is most people would rather just take a pill instead of actually be accountable and be a master of their destiny. So I'm up against a model of immediate gratification instead of long-term mastery. And I'm dedicated to the mastery of life, not so much immediate gratification. I'm not interested in a quick fix. I'm interested in how do you master your life. And so, yeah, I've been on this journey for over 5 decades, trying to learn. And I hope to continue to learn and add another piece. I just wrote a principle on Nether's theorem and the relationship to human perceptions just day before yesterday. And that's another little piece I'm working on. And I'm working on my textbook on the Logos, which I think needs to be heard, because some of the greatest aspects of human behavior have a root, and they can trace it literally all the way back to at least 3,000 something BC. You can trace it. And you can see the evolution of the thoughts that have led to where we are today and the understanding. And it has, and some of the greatest minds have been adding and contributing to it. And so standing on the shoulders of giants, I think, is meaningful.
It's interesting that you brought up the convergence of sciences after you described the Logos. And I'd be curious, just maybe if you could leave me with some information as it relates to what you've been learning throughout your I guess journey with the logos?
Well, the logos is a term that, depending on who you read in time, there was Anaximander called it nous. And Plato didn't use the actual term logos, but was aware of it because Heraclitus had done it, and Socrates had it. Socrates mentioned it. And they had different terms for it. He called it the world of ideal forms, the celestial world of ideal forms. But what it was, in all the metaphysical and mystical language, is really nothing more than a projection of our own brain. So when we put the neural correlates together with it, our amygdala, which is a subcortical structure, there's two of them. They're little amygdala, which means almond-shaped structures. They take sensory information, which are evoked potentials, action potentials, that come in from transduced receptors, and they come into the spinal cord or brainstem, go up to the thalamus, and relay over into the amygdala. The amygdala assigns a valency to it. Is it a pleasure or a pain? Is it a positive or a negative? Is it a prey or a predator? If it's a prey, it assigns a positive valency to it, and then we seek it. It initiates cerebellar response, and we cause the seeking to go and attract it because it's prey. We want to eat it. It's a philic attraction to consume and eat. And our eating disorders are based on these perceptions, believe it or not. So the amygdala assigns valency. The valency is stored in the hippocampus. The hippocampus creates episodic memories and takes the experience and stores it. Because if it is perceived as pleasure, it wants to store it because it now knows and can associate that with future food sources. So for survival purposes, that's essential. If it's valent negatively, and we have an instinct to avoid it, and it represents a predator, we store that in the hippocampus to protect ourselves in the future by association. And so our hippocampus stores all these memories, which has been called the subconscious mind for a long time, and stores all that information for survival purposes that represent valent prey or predator, pleasure or pain, hedonism and hedonism. And when we do that, the external world runs our life because we're always on the alert. You see, if we infatuate with something that's pleasurable, it occupies space and time in our mind and runs our life. And if we resent something and it's painful, we have intrusive thoughts and it occupies space and time and runs our life. So we're externally driven and controlled by external sources as long as we have a valent, polarized perception. And this is called the passions. The passions are seeking that which is unobtainable and trying to avoid that which is unavoidable. Because even if you get prey, it's short-lived and you got to eat again. If you avoid predator, that's short-lived because you're going to keep coming after you. So the pursuit of these valent perceptions is a source of futility and survival. And we basically, if we spend our lives being evoked by outside stimuli, we hold ourselves back in life. We're constantly reacting. We're victims of history instead of masters of destiny. Now, this is the logos in the form of logic, where we use rhetorical persuasion in order to make things right or wrong for logic. That's the lowest level of the logos. As we go up to the cingulate cortex, posterior, middle, anterior cingulate cortex, up into the prefrontal cortex, and then the ventral prefrontal cortex, we start to integrate the pairs of opposites, the valencies, and make a non-valent, objective, neutral experience. Wilhelm Wundt called it a simultaneous contrast, where we see both sides simultaneously. It's neither positive nor negative. In the amygdala, it's either positive or negative. In the executive center, the medial prefrontal cortex, it's neither.
That's why it's fascinating that there's a cerebral cortex, which is literally this X that formulates like this intersection that goes on inside the brain.
Exactly.
It's almost metaphorical.
Yeah, yeah. Keep going.
And yeah, I was just going to say it's goes back to the consilience you were describing to begin
That's
with.
another term for it. Now, once
Right.
we integrate this, which is the seed of integration, Scientific American, October, I believe, 2022, has a fantastic article on the integration components of this area of the brain. When we integrate that, we take that which is prey, which activates our parasympathetic nervous system and acetylation epigenetically, and we take that predator side, which is sympathetic, fight or flight, and methylation, and we integrate these two sides. One creates a delta wave, one creates a beta wave. If you put the delta and beta waves together, 3 cycles, 13 cycles together, you get an 8 cycles per second. You get an alpha theta junction. When you get an alpha theta junction, a gamma synchronicity occurs and you get a gestalt balancing, integrated eureka, aha, inspirational, authentic moment of integration.
Yeah.
That's the logos, the rational order that you perceive in the universe expressed there. Now, when we're down into our amygdala, we still have the logos, but the pairs of opposites, you're conscious of one and unconscious of the other, but your intuition knows the other side, and it's entangled simultaneously, but you're just momentarily blind to it. So the logos is the rational order that's sitting inside our experience. And we're now have the logos put into neurological language. But the logos is what happens, because what happens, we have this rational order and it comes through us visually. We see the order, you understand the regularities of the laws of the universe, and we see the order and we have the ability to express it. So we can see it and express it. So visually and auditorily, we're able to integrate this and see the hidden order and have this aha moment of authenticity. When we infatuate with something and minimize ourselves, we're inauthentic. When we resent something and exaggerate ourselves, we're inauthentic. But when we see both sides simultaneously, we have an authentic moment of self-actualized state where we see what's actually there, not what is realized through our limiting senses. So this entire axis, axiology, is the
100 books.
and the logos is the word, it is the law, it is the rational order between the aspects of human beings that's been disowned, that's been projected through other human beings socially, and it's the hidden order between us and the cosmos. It's the recognition of the laws of the universe that are unviolable. And so that's why I'm writing a text on this in much more depth, and going through hundreds of philosophers and thinkers as they have referred to it over the centuries to try to help people realize that this has been going on since it's been showing up in philosophical and theological and scientific and neurological. All the disciplines have referred to it. And I'm going from chemistry to math to physics to this and showing the logos inside there. And
Yeah, it's interesting how you use the word valency too, because of all words, that word exists within so many of the ologies,
Yeah.
right? In psychology, you have your valence, which is your affects, how you come across to others. In chemistry, you have the
binding,
the valency, which are the binding, right? So that's like the group number of any of the elements on the periodic table.
exactly.
It goes across. It keeps going on. And one thing that I think about when I think of valency is kind of a frequency, right? It's a state of resonance. And as you've mentioned, when you ascend in crescendo to that actualized state, you're experiencing these gamma wave frequencies, these aha moments. And this is actually measured by a lot of people who, have had their brains scanned when they're going through any kind of awakening,
Yes.
if you will, any like peak experience. It's always like a gamma level frequency. And the logos being the word and the law itself that kind of synthesizes that greater experience. What do you think the overall web that almost envelops the logos itself would be in that instance?
Well, it depends on the different disciplines how you'd word it, but
Sure.
at a quantum theory, quantum field theories version, it would be Planck's domain where quantum fluctuations occur at Planck wavelengths. And there would be a emergence and submergence of particles and waves in perfect symmetry between energy, matter, and information. And so we could break it down into that subtle level, and that's, as far as we know, what's real, what's actually there. Or we could basically break it down as a gamma synchronicity and a moment of authenticity. So we could take it, we could look at the chemistry and show that there's a homeostatic set point that's now found. That's, we have what they call a moral licensing effect to homeostate our perceptions. We have a homeostatic mechanism called hedonic adaptation and desensitization to do it. We have thousands of interoceptive feedback systems in the brain, which we call intuition, to try to regulate this. All I'm doing is reducing the logos down to, we could go all the way down to the quantum vacuum, or we could go up to the neurological level, or we could start at the chemical level. And this is what the logos is about. Every discipline is the logos at a different wavelength. Mm-hmm. And the wavelengths are inversions to frequencies. So the highest frequency would be Planck. And the highest frequency would be a simultaneity of opposites in a symmetry, a beautiful, elegant symmetry, which is Nether's theorem. The idea that there's a symmetry and a conservation of pairs of opposites, a conservation of energy, conservation of matter, conservation of charge, a conservation of linear and angular momentum, a conservation of information, and a conservation of positive and negative energy and matter. So these symmetries is the logos manifested through the disciplines, and it shows up in psychology, it shows up in theology. Real theology, not institutionalized, geocentric, anthropomorphic, limited, constructs that are basically manipulative tools. But real theology does not differ from this basically state. Christianity in John, 1 John tried to describe, the logos as Christ. But in Buddhist teachings, the logos was the middle path. In Mithraism in Persia, Mithra was listening to Hormazd, and that was a point of the logos. In Heraclitus, it was the unity of opposites. In Zeno, it was the pinnacle of the dialectic. They all had different terms. In Maupertuis's mathematics, it was the law of least action and the law of most efficiency. I could hit it from every angle, but it's the same principle.
Yeah, it's always the middle way in one way or another. The maps that I like to think about in my mind as I go through these concepts, which are pretty abstract, is typically the Sephirot tree in Kabbalah. And if you're studying the logos, I'm sure that you've referred to that once or twice. But it's also used by the Theosophical societies. It's used by pretty much any of the ancient traditions. And one thing that I continue to consider is the context of this conversation, but also applying the map. And the unification of opposites, the balancing of polarities, the reconciliation of rhythm, these are all things that kind of live within that logos. But in daily life, from our experiences and from the experiences that you've had and you've reflected, from the point where you had visions of where you'd be today, to the point where we are building upon information that has existed throughout the ages, and then we're converting that into our realities today, and then just going down this evolution. To me, exploring the nous, which is like the cosmic intelligence, the cosmic mind. My deep feeling is that life itself is a universal mind. And when we access it is when we're using and activating our imagination and we're feeling into that. And so I'm curious if that's something that you would potentially agree with, or if that's what you find as well, because it seems to me to be the underpinning reality of existence.
Well, throughout the ages, there's been panpsychics. Panpsychics means that there's a fundamental nature of mind that underlies everything. That space, time, energy, matter emergent out of the psyche. I don't want to rule that out. I can't prove it. I can believe it. It seems to point in that direction. It's hard to solve the hard problems in neurology on subjective experiences without it. But neurologists are frightened of it because it would throw the models of reductionism into a loop. But the idea of there may be an underlying field of intelligence at the quantum level that as our particle accelerators keep getting more advanced, we'll eventually come to that essence that's underlying everything. Instead of the existential world being the foundation, and then we trying to figure out the essential foundation we'll eventually uncover and realize the existential world is a manifestation of that. And that maybe thought and word has intention and meaning. I wrote a book years ago, and I've updated it a few times, a textbook for mainly advanced students on the physics of consciousness and light. And in there, I took nuclear physics, and I broke down nuclear physics down to all the subcomponents of the atom. And then I correlated those for fun, like Paul Dirac had done to some degree, and Wolfgang Pauli did. Wolfgang Pauli started on it. I stood on some of his shoulders and continued it. Jung and him worked together on this to try to find the correlations between energized matter and psychology. And I like to think of the strong nuclear force as an intention. And I like to think of the weak nuclear force as a disintention, the intention, the anti-intention. And that protons are manifestations of intention. They're basically neutrons through a reverse beta decay into a proton. And then you can also have the loss of an electron or the gain of a positron, depending on how you look at it. And you can actually break down the subatomic world and the nuclear world, subnuclear world, into panpsychism. And there's a way of doing that. And it would be, I can't prove it, but I know Wolfgang Pauli worked on this. He left it incomplete. I stood on his shoulders and added more details to it and made it more comprehensive and went through all the particles and the standard model that we know and correlated each of those particles with different psychological aspects. And it has some rationality to it. I can't prove it. I have no technology to prove it by. But it would be fascinating if it turns out to be accurate. So I just keep my eyes open and keep researching and keep working on different components. But it may be that there's a fundamental intelligence. Now, the question is, if you intend something that's labeled valently positively charged, you're assuming that the universe is out of order. And if you label something that you're trying to disintend, you're assuming that there's a valency and there's something out of order. And so the creation process, the creative mind, that's an imaginative mind, is based on the idea of an incomplete awareness, that we need to fix things. A graced mind, a fully graced mind, has a completely neutral neutron state. And it has the proton and electrons united into the neutron. And it's interesting, this state has no valency, no desire to change anything. And if we study the components of these chemistries and how they work and the structures of these things and see the order that's coming out of it, there's a beautiful correlation between panpsychism and chemistry. But most people don't dabble in that area, but I have no problem dabbling in any area that might give some clues.
To me, that seems like a human microcosmic experience of what's actually going on throughout the universe
Yes.
itself, right? Because we're all out in this exploration, right? Because we assume that there's something to explore. We have these questions, right? There's a genius who said the quality of your life is based on the quality of the questions you ask.
Exactly.
I think you might know that one. And it's almost like the questions we ask, our life, our existence, creates the entire reality that we kind of step into.
Well,
And then outside of that, we go back to
It's
this.
a participatory universe. As Wheeler said,
Yeah.
I went to the Wheeler's office in Princeton, and I met with Freeman Dyson, who is the astrophysicist there, who took over Albert Einstein's position, and we had discussions. And Wheeler said that he believed that it's a participatory universe, and that all of us are participating in the transformation of this universe. So I can't prove or disprove that. Cosmology is an interesting thing. You're trying to study the origin of the universe, cosmology and cosmogony, but it's a massive, vast system, so you can't really grasp it all. It keeps expanding in your awareness. But
Well, that's why you have consilience, right? That's why you have like the other sciences to kind of balance off the
you
laws.
try to build on what you know. Whatever you know, there's always an unknown. Socrates said it really nicely. He said, "I know nothing," because he realized that whatever he knew was an infinitesimal compared to what he did not know, which was infinite. So I can get more humble as I get older. I realize how little I know compared to what I don't know, and that's the journey. But the mystery is pursuing. You know, when you infatuate with something and don't know the downside, you don't know it. It's not gnosis, it's agnosis. And if you know the downside but don't know the upside, you don't know it. So anything that's in the amygdala has distorted realizations that are really agnostic. When you actually know something, you have love. You see both sides of it simultaneously. And you have gnosis. And now you have knowledge. And you only have a tiny bit of knowledge in the universe compared to what you don't know. So the pursuit of knowledge and the pursuit of epistemology, the study of that, I think is a wise thing. I mean, the great philosophers have emphasized that. That is also correlated with the teleology, the purpose and meaning, and the ontology, the study of being. They all wove together and they're really one and the same thing, and that's why I put emphasis on values. And values are arbitrary things that based on our voids. Voids are based on all of our judgments. Judgments are either in ones that are injected, you might say, or inculcated from outer authorities. And our journey is about transcending outer authorities and waking up our true nature. And so our journey is transcending our voids and eventually having fulfillment, pleroma, gnosis, and epistemological knowledge in life. We're in awe to the degree that we do. We have a gamma synchronicity to let us know when we had a glimpse of it.
As you look at all these different systems and you can learn in books and experience, the insights that others gave, many of these individuals were speaking about direct Gnostic experiences, mystical experiences in many ways, a cosmic knowing from access to something that's potentially a little bit beyond the intellect. And so I'm curious how much of that you might have experienced in your life, or how much you factor that into your understanding of how things work.
Well, I have thousands, and I've got them documented, thousands of moments of meditation, thousands. And not in every case, but in some cases, hundreds of cases, I have moments of just awe and speechlessness and lucidity. And I document those. I capture what I have and try to write down that moment. And they're a gamma synchronicity. They're tear, heart-opening visual clarities. And I tell people to document those moments because it's like a jigsaw puzzle. It's unveiling the order in the chaos, the apparent chaos. And you're building a puzzle, a cosmic puzzle. You're filling in the gaps by this. So you could call those moments of mystical experience. You could call those moments of presence. You could call those moments of enlightenment. You could call those moments of authenticity. You could call them gamma synchronous ahas. I could give 1,000 names for it. But to me, I think every human being innately knows that when they have those moments to capture it and write it down, capture those moments, because they're confirmations of authenticity and guiding feedback systems towards what you feel you're here to do in life. And yeah, I've had those throughout the last 52 years on thousands of occasions, but hundreds of them are really lucid. And I have it, I'd have to pull it out off my computer. I have it on my computer. Every one of those moments I've documented and what I'm to do in my life. And what's amazing is the first one that I really documented was October 12th, 2 a.m., 1982. And it was so lucid. I had one when I met Paul Bragg the night I met Paul Bragg, but I didn't document that till afterwards. But this one I document on the moment. And that night, I had this automatic writing, and I wrote out 300 class structures from 2 something in the morning till about 6 something in the morning, and just poured out with tears and writing the entire thing like a Jerry Maguire, Tom Cruise moment. And all of those things have all manifested. All these things that have been listed, those are all manifested in my life. So when I get those, I capture those because I know those are destined. And I believe we have that access. I believe we have a knowing inside that we can access. Now there's hyper-religiosity when you have temporal lobe epilepsy and you activate the temporal parietal junction near the occipital junction. There, if you stimulate that, you can get hyper-religiosity and you think, well, there's order to everything. A bee goes by and there's a meaning behind it. This is something that transcends those manic illusions of the amygdala. This is a moment of integration and integrity and a knowing. And yeah, I believe that we all have access to it. And most people are not necessarily capitalizing on that to the degree that someone like myself has taken the time to do.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your wisdom. And thank you for continuing to follow the things you love. I think you really truly embody the synthesis of love and wisdom. And it's profound what you can accomplish when you're organized, when you take initiative in life, and you learn to convert the challenges into something fruitful. That's really inspiring, and I hear it in your voice. I feel it in you as you speak, and it's something that I definitely aspire towards. So I really, really, really appreciate your
I
time.
see myself in you, but you're ahead of me. How old are you?
27.
Well, 27 is when I had that epiphany about prioritization. I was studying comparative religion and philosophies and sciences, and I wrote a book on the tree of life on comparative religions at about that age, and was going and traveling to meeting various monks and teachers and rabbis and Buddhists and stuff like that to try to find these mysteries. And so I see myself, I see you, me. We're similar in that respect. Except you're ahead of me, so you'll stand on my shoulders and do way more.
No. It's truly it's shared. I felt the same thing. I saw something that I can become, and you were that image. So thank you again. I'll let you go. Dr. Demartini says, vitality is directly proportional to the clarity of our vision. And if that's true, then this man with thousands of books behind him and lifetimes of insight within him is a mirror of vitality itself. We don't see the world the same way. He warned against finding the divine in everything. He called it mania. But for me, that shimmer behind the ordinary is the truth. The sacred woven into every moment, every breath, Still, we met. Two men listening for truth through two different instruments tuned to the same silence. Perhaps that's why we saw ourselves in one another. Neither of us are here to escape the questions. We're here to live them deeply, repeatedly, until the answers reveal themselves, not as facts, but as who we've become. May this conversation ripple outward. May it remind you the Logos is not just out there. It's alive within. In your questions, your values, and the vision still taking shape. Still, to me, even in a world governed by law and logic, the mystery still gets the final word.